Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. Several of you I know, some of you I'm looking forward to getting to know better. We are living in remarkably turbulent times, and many people are feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, numb and agitated, unable to rest and focus. Just put your thumbs up or raise your hand if any of that list resonates right now. So it's not a personal failure. It's a nervous system response to stress, to threat, to uncertainty. So this series is a trauma-informed ways of practicing with mindfulness. It's grounded in the early Buddhist classical teachings, and it's adapted to support us in times exactly like this. So today's session is 2 hours. Next Tuesday also is 2 hours. And then we have a 4-hour session from 2 to 6 on February 7th. Times are in Pacific time. Apologies for any confusion about that. And thank you for people on the East Coast who are going to have a bit of a late night tonight. Appreciate that. Yeah. When it comes to the question time, the discussion time, if you want to ask a question, but you don't want your video recorded, just turn your video off and either put your question through chat or just ask with your voice. And what I really want to do on the onset is prioritize taking care of yourself. And so really what's needed is to make sure that you are okay, grounded. You're not too activated. You're managing what you're experiencing. And if managing what you're experiencing means that it's helpful for you to stand or to stretch or to lie down or to walk quietly, I want you to do that. But if you're doing any of those movement things in the video, then just kindly turn the video off. And also if eating is something that you need to do, so helpful to turn the video off, as well as to keep the video on stable surfaces. My brain still gets scrambled quickly when people's screens are moving. So each of these sessions is going to have a guided meditation, a time where I'm talking, and then we won't have today a chance for breakout room, but we will likely in the other sessions. And then in the end, a discussion. So if you have questions that arise while I'm talking, make a note of them, and there'll be time to bring them up in the discussion time. By way of container, this class and the recording is only going to be shared with people who've registered. And because of that, we're really asking that anything that anybody speaks about stays in this context. It's not spoken out of this context. And likewise, if any of you know each other and you want to bring up something that somebody shared, then it's helpful to ask permission, even in private conversations, before bringing anything else up. We also want to be careful about how we talk about trauma. So while this is a series to help us with tools to give us the capacity to stay more regulated, we're not processing trauma directly in this space. And so what that means is that we're not inviting you to share the specific details of what caused trauma. Those kinds of conversations belong in a setting where there's more capacity and skill to hold them so that they do the right thing, which is that they just gently release. And we want to be careful because as you've noticed, most people had their hands raised when we were talking about impacts of stress on your systems. So we want to be gentle with how we engage in this space and what we share so that we move in the direction of stability and skill rather than in the direction of overwhelm or re-traumatization. So you're certainly welcome to ask questions about how to meditate and how to use these practices skillfully. You're certainly welcome to describe symptoms or patterns you're noticing, for example, numbness or agitation or trouble concentrating. You're welcome to ask how to work with these experiences and practices. And we're just asking you not to describe the events or the particulars that actually caused the trauma. Is that clear? Thumbs up. Awesome. And it's not about shutting anything down. Certainly it's not about wanting it to make you feel uncomfortable about having these experiences. It's just about protecting each of us and our collective nervous system. And, if anything comes up and you're not sure, it's always okay to pause, check in, or ask. So you don't have to figure it out. So today is actually a really big day because, we're starting this program and I want to give an overview of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. I want to give an overview of trauma, and I want to talk about a trauma-informed way of working with the first foundation of mindfulness. And that's a lot. So don't try and make your brains tie into a pretzel trying to remember all of this. Just let it wash over. The recordings are going to be available. You can listen to them again. And as we understand more about the foundations of mindfulness, we'll understand more about both the classical teachings related to them, as well as how we need to adapt them when we either are dealing with trauma or we are in teaching positions and our clients or our students are dealing with trauma. So let's just start just for a moment about trauma. What does that mean? And it isn't usually defined by what happened, but by what the nervous system could not process at that time. So it's an experience that overwhelms our capacity to respond, to integrate, or to recover. And I have been able to differentiate 6 different categories of trauma. The first one is developmental. This is what happens when there's a chronic lack of safety, attunement, or comfort in our early life. And what happens are the patterns that form to cope and to survive. Situational trauma is the kind of trauma that I used to think was what trauma was. It's the stuff that we live through. It's the accidents, the violence, the medical procedures, the disasters, the war, the assault. It's the stuff that we've lived through. But epigenetic trauma is not the stuff that we've lived through. It's the stuff that our ancestors lived through, and that it marked their nervous system, their DNA, and that mark was passed on to us. So we carry it even if we haven't lived through it. Systemic is the stuff that's embedded in social, political, and legal systems. So we can experience it. We can also have the impact of it passed down epigenetically. but it's social systems, it's political systems, it's legal systems that's holding it together. And vicarious trauma is what happens when, sometimes it happens to us when we watch the news, when we get on social media, when we are listening to a friend and they are trying to metabolize their own trauma. It happens a lot for frontline workers who are navigating trauma. And compound trauma, the sixth kind, is when we have more than one of these. So this list, which is already a mouthful, it helps to explain why trauma is so widespread. There's a lot of ways that we can be experiencing many of these, including long-term meditators and including people who are deeply committed to social change. Adverse childhood experiences scores report 1 out of 3 people have had an event in childhood that leaves a mark on their nervous system. That's like 30%. And developmental trauma affects a lot of us. And so when this whole patterning shifts, it makes it possible for the other kinds of traumas also to release more easily, as it gives more resilience. And so the integrated meditation program is a 6-month program that is dedicated just on that particular focus. And I won't be going into it more now, but just to name it, that it's there, and that the impact of changing our baseline patterns has a big effect on our ability to deal with some of these other things that I just named. You can learn more about it by attending the free drop-ins or checking out the website. So the 4 foundations matter because this particular sutta, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, of all of the 10,000 suttas, this is one of the most highly revered. And it's revered so highly because the foundations of mindfulness are considered a direct path to freedom. It is said to contain a complete understanding, for a complete framework for understanding body, experience, mind, and patterns of suffering. And yet, the instructions assume a practitioner feels safe enough to sit quietly alone, to close their eyes, to turn attention inward, and to stay present with experience. And so for many people, this is not helpful, these assumptions. In fact, they can increase our distress. So it's important that we not abandon the teachings, but we adapt how we regard them and how we use them, particularly in certain circumstances. So some of the trauma-informed principles that we will revisit again and again. Safety is not assumed. We cultivate it. Capacity matters. We practice in ways that are gradual, that are choice-based. And if anything is happening for any reason, and you're getting activated, The priority is to take care of yourself rather than to listen to what I'm saying. Respect what's going on in your signals, your body, and to strengthen your capacity for regulation rather than to override the information that is coming to you. Is that all clear? Okay. So what I'd like to do next is a guided meditation. So wherever you are, get yourself in a situation where we can sit for a while. And what I'd like you to do before you close your eyes is just look around the room. Just notice what's in your space. And just take a moment and look over your shoulders and your other shoulder. And now what I'd like you to do is just look around again. And as you're looking again, just take note of the fact that there isn't anything visually frightening. Notice the absence of danger. And check over your shoulders. Register behind you, in front of you, and around you. And when you're ready, you can allow your head to come forward. And if it feels easeful, you can let your eyes close. And just notice when you close your eyes, what you notice after noticing the absence of danger around your physical space and your visual field. You might notice a little bit more of a feeling of weight, a little bit more sense of ease, a little bit less tension, or it might show up in different ways. So now I'd like to invite you to take a couple of cleansing breaths. Just breathe in and out. And as you breathe in, just let the fresh air soothe and nourish, fill you. And as you breathe out, allow the old air to release and allow anything else to release that's no longer essential. Maybe thinking, earlier conversations, plans about what's going to happen next. Now, I'd like to invite you to imagine a safe space, a place that feels really protective, welcoming, comfortable, and just really easy to be in. It could be a cozy room by a fire. It could be a beautiful place in nature. It could be all kinds of things. It could be someplace that you've been. It could be someplace you'd want to go. It could be something that's just imagined. But whatever it is, in whatever way that comes, just let it come. And as it comes, just see if you can notice what happens, what it looks like. What kind of colors and shapes do you see there? What are the sounds like? Are there any smells that you notice? But really, more important than anything is, what does it feel like to be there? What happens when you're in a safe space? What happens to the feeling of your weight, or the feeling of your warmth, or the texture of your breath? Or how much tightness is in your jaw, or your neck, or your belly? So just allow yourself to be in this safe space, the safe space that's just right for you, welcoming, easy, protected. And just take a moment and let yourself feel what it feels like to feel safe and protected in this space. And so just taking some time and letting the breath fill you, move through your body. Notice as you feel more ease from your safe space, if the breath can allow your body to move in a way where you feel there's just a little bit more space between your vertebrae, between your shoulder blades, between your collarbones and your chin. Not from a place of effort, from a place of ease, from a place of curiosity, from attention. Now just let your attention connect with the parts of your experience that feels solid. You might notice your weight or the feeling of the direct experience of what bones and muscles feel like. And how solidity has a form and a shape. And right now, for the people that I see, there's a sitting shape. So notice the solidity in your own body, the bones, the muscles, the weight. And through your own bones and muscles and weight, sense into the solidity of the earth underneath, the ground underneath. And as you sense the ground underneath, does it feel more support or less support? Do you feel more alone or less alone? There isn't a right answer. We're just being curious to see how it feels. When we open to the element of solidity, earth element in our own body, now we shift to fluidity. Water element. We might notice some wetness in our mouth or in our eyes. We might hear our heartbeat or feel the sense of the blood pulsing through our veins. You might feel the saliva in your mouth. This is the fluidity of our bodies. And many of us were drinking cups of tea or right before this. And so the water element around us is also something we can connect with. In mist, in fog, in lake, in ocean, in stream, in the water coming out of the tap, in the shower. So just coming back to our body experience, just noticing the water element. Tears, sometimes of joy, sometimes of sorrow. It's a water element. The next element that we can notice is fire, heat. We feel it when we're warm. We can also notice the absence of it when we're cold. It usually gets stirred up when we're exercising. Many of you on the East Coast are in the middle of an enormous Arctic storm where the temperatures are incredibly freezing. It takes a lot to go outside, even when there's good gear, just the contact, the cold, the absence of the warmth. So we can feel the fire element, how it helps us metabolize food. And what happens when there's just the right amount of warmth? The body can relax. It doesn't brace. The next element we can observe is the air element, and this also has to do with movement. We can experience it in the breath, moving our chest and our abdomen. We can experience it when we're standing or we're walking, the micro movements that we need in order to stay balanced standing, or the movements that happen when we're walking. In a Tibetan medicine context, when we have a lot of thinking, one of the ways that can be referred to is that there's a lot of wind element. The mind is stirred up. Just taking a moment and noticing the subtle movements, just sitting here. There might be a little rocking happening. The breath is happening. There might be little movements that are not volitional that are happening. So we're just curious and watching movement, knowing this is one of the features of the air element. Now I'd like to bring another element, and that's the space element. You might get a sense of the space in your mouth, the space in your nostrils. You might get a feeling for the space between your fingers, or the space that your body is occupying. So one of the things that can be really helpful about working with the elements is that there's less identification when we look at things from the elemental perspective than when we say, I am having this experience, or this is me right now. And that can support us being able to be present with things, a little bit less reactive to them. So now for the last few minutes of this meditation practice, allow your attention to settle on your breath. Just notice where you're breathing and how you're breathing. And without making it a project, just let attention settle there, rest there. And now, wherever your attention is, I'd like you to bring your attention to your right foot. Just feel your right foot. Feel the sensations of it, the weight of it, shape of it. And moving your attention up your right foot to your ankle. And slowly up your shin and your calf. Noticing sensations. Noticing the feeling of weight, solidity of your right calf and shin till you get to the knee. And moving up from the knee, up the right leg, feeling and sensing the leg from the knee all the way up, slowly, carefully, attentively, to come to the right hip joint. And then moving attention from the right hip joint along the back of the sacrum to the left hip joint. And now down the left leg, feeling and sensing the left leg. Until you get to the left knee. And down the left knee to the shin and the calf. Slowly, carefully, attentively, till you get to the left ankle. And then the left foot. And now the right hand and wrist. And forearm. And the right elbow. And moving up the elbow slowly, up the right upper arm to the shoulder joint. And from the shoulder joint across from the right shoulder, the top of the shoulders, to the top of the left shoulder, to the left shoulder joint. And then down the left arm to the left elbow. And down from the left elbow to the left wrist. To the left hand. And now both legs and both arms at the same time. Sensing your arms and your legs all together. And now bring listening in. You've already been listening to my voice. Bring in the sounds that are in your room, outside of your room. So there's sensing and there's listening. And now very, very, very slowly open your eyes just a fraction. So that there's just the first tiny glimmers of sight. And notice how compelling sight is, how it pulls attention out through your eyeballs. But stay connected to the sensing and the listening and allow sight to land rather than to pull. And as you feel stable in sensing and listening and letting sight land with the tiniest bit, allow your eyes to open above the screen and continue to allow the sight to land. And so I invite you to take a break until the top of the hour, continuing to sense, to listen, and to let sight land. See you back here in a few minutes. Welcome back, folks. So I want to start with the first foundation of mindfulness. And the first foundation of mindfulness has 9 different practices. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but I will mention them in brief. Let's turn this timer off so that it stops doing what it's doing. So the whole orientation around the body is around, there's several different practices, mindfulness of breathing, the postures, daily activities, body parts, elements, and corpse contemplations. So in our meditation practice together, we worked a little bit with posture and elements and breath. Let me go into them a little bit more detail. So the mindfulness of breathing is the practice of attending to the natural rhythm of the breath. It's of not trying to control the breath, but of allowing the in-breath, noticing it, and letting the breath be a way that attention starts to gather and collect, to be attentive to the in-breath and to the out-breath, sometimes refined through the awareness of the length, the texture, and the bodily impact. And it's a foundational practice because it stabilizes attention, it unifies the body and mind. It serves as a gateway to concentration and insight. The breath links awareness with different kinds of autonomic processes, and the breath is always present, making it portable and reliable. And what we can experience is that with sustained attention, it's supportive. It helps us calm our reactivity, supports clarity, and it helps us understand principles that are like the basis of what we're dealing with. Things change. Things are not inherently satisfactory. And other characteristics that we miss when we're looking at things from a perspective of identification and seeing them as solid. So breath in many traditions is a real key. It's a real focus. It can be a real support. The second is the different postures. So we were already practicing with sitting, and there's standing, walking, and lying down. And each of them can be developed as a practice. So in the West, we tend to be preoccupied with sitting as a meditation posture. And in Thailand, there were lots of places and times where monastics did very little sitting and a whole lot more walking. So, but when our systems are all jangled, it's also to remember we can lie down. And it's also helpful that we can just stand up. So it prevents us from getting too stiff or too locked in a particular posture. And it's also something that accompanies us throughout the day. You know, what's the posture of our body? That's fairly something that we can just track. We can just notice. Are we sitting? Are we standing? Are we lying down? Are we walking? When I dance, I can do all kinds of things that don't fit into those 4 postures. So I'm not thinking about whether it has to fit into those 4 postures. But for this practice, we can think about those 4 postures. So clear comprehension in daily activities. This really is our daily life. This is our eating, our taking a snack, washing dishes, it's weeding, it's shoveling snow, it's scraping ice off of the windshield, it's making sure that the car is plugged into the thing so that the engine doesn't crack. It's the normal, ordinary activities. It's washing our clothes, it's putting them away, it's putting the dishes away. And what's so important about this is that even though this is really underrated, this is where a lot of our practice begins to shine in the way that we engage with our daily life activities, how we engage with the simple things of our life. It's a way that we can cultivate discernment about our intention, about our appropriateness, about our impact. And it's a really important way that we bridge our ethical living and our meditation by just seeing how we move through our world. So this daily life activities is extremely important, and it's often underrated. It's not often that there's a lot of emphasis on this. And then the 32 parts. This is really going through the body and looking at what a body is made out of. It's got hair, it's got skin, it's got organs, it's got bones, it's got liquid, it's got systems. And the point of this is to begin to get a feeling for what a body actually is, rather than our idealization of what we think it should be. And beginning to start getting a little bit of a handle on some of the attachment that we have to our body. We might get all excited or feel very prideful about some parts of ourselves. But I don't know how many of us would feel prideful about our liver or our spleen or, the mucus. Our synovial fluid. It's just not that sexy. And it's not a personal failing that it's not that sexy. It's just that's its nature. So the value of this and the value of doing this is that we start to get a little bit less identified to this thing as being me. And we start to see it more in terms of what it's actually made out of. And that disidentification in that way then helps us be able to respond in a little bit more wise and skillful ways to some of the changes that we experience in our body. And then the mindfulness of the elements, which we had a brief foray into our guided meditation, which is looking at the body in terms of the elements of solidity, cohesion, temperature, movement, space. And again, this is another entrance into there's more going on here than the solid sense of me as an unchanging and permanent fixed entity. So even when we shift our focus from feeling ourselves from the earth element, that experience of noticing the earth element is very different from noticing the water element, from the movement. So the experience that we have of ourselves in these different elements is very different. And so that sense of being something solid and permanent and stable begins to start moving a little bit when we start looking at what is this thing made up of. But it also helps us move from being like so isolated and separate into recognizing, well, the earth in my body is not all that different from earth in the earth, or earth element in the tree, or the earth element in the rock. or the earth element in the coyote, you know? So that sense of being somehow unique and different and separate and isolated begins to start softening when we start seeing things in terms of elements and recognizing that these elements are all over the place. They're not unique, they're not personal, they're not individualistic. I might have my own particular shape, but everybody's got a shape. They have their own individual shape. So then it helps us just start to feel a little bit more of like how all of these things connect. Reframing the body as a process rather than as a possession. So there's 4 different contemplations on corpses, and I'm not going to go into any of them. And this is also to really help us come to terms with death and decay as a normal part of our process. That when we have these human bodies, then one of the natural consequences of having one is that they die. And a natural consequences of death is that it decomposes. So I'm just going to, as much as just to touch it, to name that it exists, but this is not the territory we go into when we've got trauma. We need things a little bit more gentle, kind, stabilizing, rather stuff that further dismantles. We need stuff that builds more sense of coherence and stability. So what I want to go through now is some of the assumptions, some of the risks, and some of the care that is needed with each of these different kinds of meditations. From the mindfulness of breathing, from a trauma-informed perspective, this practice assumes that we have safety enough, that we can sit still, we can turn our attention inward, that the breath is neutral or pleasant, and that sustained internal focus is manageable. That's a lot of assumptions for somebody who's dealing with trauma. It's just already, there's just no way. So if that's the first instruction, which it is, go to the root of a tree or sit in an empty hut or in an empty field, cross your legs, make your attention upright and focus your attention inwards. Like we can't do it. So the breath can be linked to panic, collapse, or loss of control. We don't have the sense that it's safe to close our eyes. We don't have the capacity to focus on what's going on. And so what we understand in a trauma-informed perspective is that this first initial instruction may already leave a whole bunch of people at the gate. And so what we want to do is not to assume that people can do this, that we can do this. We want to listen and we want to create choices and opportunities so that there are options rather than make assumptions. And so without understanding, first of all, that all of these things are an assumption, without adaptation, without choice, then this first instruction can intensify dysregulation rather than calm it. So we don't ever say, do this. We invite. If this feels available to you, you're invited to close your eyes. And if it doesn't, leave them open. If it doesn't feel comfortable turning your attention inwards, then orient outwards. Look around the room. Look at something that's comforting. Go pick up a rock or something in your room that feels comforting and feel it, hold it. Don't turn your attention inwards. So part of the whole orientation with a trauma-informed perspective is not assuming, making choices, and really starting to listen for the signals that let us know when what we're doing is helpful or not helpful. And this is part of the tricky. part, okay? Because the Buddha said all of these things are good. And the Buddha in that sutta says that if you follow these instructions, you can experience one of two results. Either that you're fully liberated or that there's just a tiny little smidgen of suffering left. So the Buddha didn't have any language for trauma and didn't have any language for when it was important to adapt these things. So we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust that there can be a really significant way that we need to adapt these teachings under certain circumstances when we can't do the things that is assumed that we should be able to do. And because the teachings don't include that, we doubt ourselves. And because trauma-informed teachings are not universal, it's often the case that we have teachers that don't support us trusting our intuition. And the combination can cause quite a lot of dis-ease or discomfort or doing things that are not what we need because the teacher said it's what we're supposed to be doing right now. So in a trauma-informed perspective, we need to develop discernment. And the discernment is we need to understand what the teachings are and what the teacher is saying, but we also need to learn to listen. Is that what I need right now? And if it's not what I need right now, then what do I need right now? And that is not something that most teachers teach. I have not often heard a teacher say, if you're dysregulated, don't listen to me. And that has to be our priority. Your safety and your health and well-being have to be much more important than what I'm saying to you. It has to be. So even with the first instruction, we run into all kinds of assumptions and presumptions. And in a trauma situation, it's likely that we're not going to be able to make use of that. And so we're going to need to learn how to trust ourselves that we might not be able to close our eyes. We might not be able to sit still. We might not be able to turn our attention inwards and just know to trust it, that that's correct. It's not forever, but it's correct for right now. Trust it. The second one is the mindfulness of the postures. This practice assumes that inhabiting our body feels safe and the proprioceptive awareness is tolerable. For some, certain postures, especially sitting still, can evoke vulnerability or threat responses. And so again, in a trauma-informed practice, we emphasize choice, that movement is not the antithesis of meditation, and that we bring choice and movement and inhabit different postures to support us rather than to freeze us or to solidify the idea that somehow we're doing what everybody else is doing because that's what we're supposed to. We want to move out of what everybody else is doing. So even though when we're in a meditation group, we need to have some kind of thoughtfulness about how do we engage so that we're not disruptive to the container, we don't want to be discerning what we should do based on what everybody else is doing. We might need to make a different choice. Everybody else might be comfortable sitting, and we might not be. We might need to stand, we might need to walk, and we need to trust that, especially if we can do that in a way that isn't disruptive. So in a Zoom context, it's totally undisruptive for you to stand up and to walk. There's no problem. I would just ask you to turn your video off. It's not a big deal. But we're not used to listening in that way. We're used to trying to figure out what is the group asking and how do I fit into it, rather than what do I need right now. So we need to start learning to ask different questions. And that helps us respond in ways that are more attuned. Now, the next one, mindfulness of body parts, it assumes that we have a healthy, stable sense of ourself, a minimal sense of shame or disgust towards this body. For people with developmental or body-based trauma, you cannot make that assumption. It can intensify self-loathing or disassociation or fragmentation. And so it's not meant to increase our self-hatred, our shame. It's meant to increase our discernment and our ability to understand what our body is made out of. So there are two parts of this body parts thing. One is the unbeautiful aspects of it, where we're looking at things in order to really get a handle on the fact that it isn't sexy. And the context is that you had a large group of celibate young men who were trying to keep themselves somewhat sane. And as a practice, that helped them deal with lust, is to look at the unsexy parts of their own bodies, to come to terms with it that way. But the other part of the way the sutta is written is not about unbeautiful, but about just this is the way it is. If you have mung beans and red rice and wild rice and black beans and zucchini beans and lima beans all in a bag, it's not that they're unbeautiful. They're all just different. They're just the way they are. There's red ones and green ones and orange ones and black ones and white ones, and there's big ones and flat ones and small ones. They're just like this. So there's another component of this, which is just to look at the parts, not from the unbeautiful part of it, but it's just like this. A nose is like this, a finger is like this, hair is like this, toes are like that. It's like this. And that like thisness of it also is a way to begin to separating it out from being a solid lump, that the body is a single unmoving thing, to that it's made out of different components. And that when we see the different components of it, it can begin to start shifting our way of relating to it. So, oh my goodness, there's a big, long conversation about trauma and shame. We don't need to go into it in a big detail, but shame takes up all kinds of shapes and forms, and one of them is the way we inhabit our bodies and how comfortable we feel. And so this goes right into that in the worst possible way. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to go into this in the worst possible way. We want to use these meditations in order to develop more ease, more confidence, more clarity, more capacity to differentiate between the assumption that we are a solid thing and what's actually happening here. But we don't want to flare the stuff that is so excruciating and painful and so difficult to get under, particularly when it's connected to body-based traumas. You know, the answer is we don't want to go there. You know, we just don't want to go there. So if we are able to bring these practices to mind in a way that supports confidence and ease, then we can use them. But if they're triggering or re-traumatizing, it's not helpful. So the next one is mindfulness of the elements. And then again, this practice assumes that sensation-based awareness is grounding rather than destabilizing. And so it might be true that for many people, the elements is regulating. And for others, specific qualities such as heat or pressure or movement might be activating. And so one of the qualities of a trauma-informed practice is the concept of titration. That we touch something that's uncomfortable a little bit, and then we move into something that's comfortable. We don't lock onto it and stay there. So there's this movement back and forth. Touch something a little bit and then go back and resource ourselves. And so from a trauma-informed perspective, then we are sensitive to what our needs are rather than following a generic pattern. So it might be that the classical way of teaching the elements is to go from solidity to liquid to air, or to temperature to air and to space. But it might mean that what we need is a different order, because one of those things is dysregulating. So we don't do the dysregulating thing first. We wait until there's more stability in the system. And then when there's more stability in the system, we touch it gently and then go back to where there is more ease. And so that we're careful about introducing it, not according to the way it's supposed to be, but according to what our capacity is. And so there's a difference in a trauma-informed perspective, orientation. We're listening for capacity rather than to classical progression. We're not fitting ourselves into a classical progression. We're listening for our capacity to move into these practices and noticing the impact, what's actually happening, rather than what's supposed to be happening. And that's one of the places where, when we have intensive retreats and we're getting into trouble with trauma activation, and we're dealing with teachers who may be brilliant meditation teachers in some contexts, but not trauma-informed, they can be interpreting what's happening from a classical perspective, and it can cause all kinds of problems if they don't give us helpful information, which is why we must learn to trust ourselves and listen and discern. If the teacher is giving us information that is allowing our systems to settle, then that's a good result. If the result of what the teacher's instructions are is that we're white knuckling it, we're anxious, we're feeling only partially connected to our physical experience, then those are indications that the teacher's instructions are not what we need at this moment. It doesn't mean that they're a bad teacher. It just might mean that what they are good at is not what we need right now. And that's the discernment. So the 4 different corpse meditations, you know, it assumes all kinds of things. One is that we have a willingness to be alive, that we can look at death in this way and actually have it be beneficial. It assumes a strong capacity to regulate fear, to understand disillusion. There's all kinds of things that it presumes. And so this practice is not something that I would recommend for people who have a lot of trauma in their systems, because what's needed is a lot of stability first. When there is stability, it can be a very powerful practice as a way of really coming to terms with what is possible when we have these human bodies and where do they end up, not as a way to gross ourselves out, but as a way of just becoming really steady about what happens in this life and what are these bodies made out of. And so the classically that these practices of the body are designed to ground attention, to integrate mindfulness in daily life, to dismantle identification with the body through insight and into impermanence, and to this idea that there isn't a solid, unchanging element inside of us that we can locate. And the trauma-informed discernment recognizes that these practices assume safety, inward capacity, and coherence that cannot be taken for granted, particularly in these times. And so skillful teaching and application involves knowing when, how, and whether to introduce these practices and how to adapt them so that they support ease, so that they support confidence, so that they support liberation, rather than compounding the stress that we have in our systems. So that is my reflection for today. And I am open to your impact and your comments and your feedback. And your questions. And you can put them in chat or you can raise your hand. Oh, I think I've got, let me unmute you so you can just raise your hand and speak. There you go. You can raise your hand and speak. Touch on relational trauma in a Dharma context. Can you ask the question in a different way?
Just noticing in practice when places in ourselves that haven't had healthy attachments, for example, or have particular longings for a particular type of connection is evoked in our practice, and how that can be worked with as well, rather than just an inherent body-based trauma,
So part of the reason why I have created the integrated meditation program is because the whole topic of attachment repair is a topic in and of itself. And it's a topic in and of itself because as I heard in your question, these traumas that came from relationship don't resolve in solitude and just in observation. They need to have the right ingredients of safety and attunement and protection and support and safe relating in order to repattern. So when our meditation context is primarily about what we do with observation on our cushion by ourselves, it's the opposite of optimal to shift these patterns and to shift these traumas. So, and once again, the Dhamma community is waking up slowly, but not nearly as fast as suits my preferences, about understanding the importance of attachment wounding and how it's playing out in our meditation experiences and in our Dharma communities. So when there is attachment wounding and you're wanting to resolve it in meditation, you're trying to work with things that are in opposition to each other, because the Dharma teachings classically don't have any framework that understands what attachment wounding is, why it's there, or specific tools that help repair it. And so we are using tools that presumes a certain level of attachment health. When there isn't that attachment health, we can't use those same tools in order to fix the attachment wounding. And part of the reason why I started this program was because it is my own experience that after decades of classical meditation and immersion in classical practices, these patterns didn't shift in me. And so I was seeing the impacts of them without understanding the reasons, or even having initially a frame of understanding about what they were. All I had heard was that meditation should be all that you need, and that you just need to be more patient, or you just need to do more, or there's something in your karmic configuration. All of which was like, what does that mean? Like, how can I do more? My life is totally dedicated. I've been doing this nonstop for decades. How can I do more? So after a while, I stopped asking, how can I do more? And I started asking, what else do I need to understand what's going on and shift this? And that's when I opened up to the whole attachment theory, which says very explicitly that these patterns are extremely resilient. And there's like a 70% chance that the patterns you are born with are the patterns you die with. Or that the patterns you have are the patterns you pass on to your children, or the patterns that your great grandma has is the one that you have. The statistics are staggering, which then showed me that it isn't just a question of doing more meditation, but the meditation doesn't have the leverage and the fulcrum that's needed in order to shift the pattern. And that when I understood more about what actually happens and why these patterns form and what actually shifts them, then it made a good sense to me why meditation is not corrective. When I say this, what happens for you? You, Tanya.
When you say this, what happens for me?
Yeah.
I just feel validated. Yeah. It lands.
Good. Other questions, comments, impact? Yes, please, Teresa.
Well, first, thank you so much. It's just so nice to sit here with you and with everyone. I had learned about you because I was interested in taking the workshop that you were doing in New York last weekend, and I wasn't able to make it. And anyway, I'm just delighted to be here. And I really, what you were just saying really resonates with me, because I feel like I have a fairly regular practice, and I fairly, as I say that, I feel self-conscious about that. But I usually don't, when I'm feeling fine, I can sit fine, and when I get triggered, to use that word for lack of a better word, when I get activated, it is very hard to sit, and so yeah, I walk, or I try to walk, or sometimes because I do deal with a lot of anger that rises up. So I wonder. I'm very curious about the program that you mentioned, but I just wonder, in this for now, what do you do in those instances when one gets really activated and just has a hard time sitting down, or
So I think that's part of where the discernment needs to start to develop. We need to start developing more language and understanding first of all, when I'm in a zone where what's happening is something I can manage, then you can bring the tools that you have to it. When what's happening is activating such that it's not manageable, then before you can bring the meditation tools, you need to get back into that zone.
mm-hmm.
So the first order of business is, how do you get back into that zone, that window of tolerance? And those tools to get back into the zone are not the meditation tools. They're a whole separate set of tools. So that's the first thing, is how do you get back into that window? What are the tools that are going to help you get there? And then when you're there, what are the meditation tools and other tools that support you to understand what has happened, what you need, and how to stay balanced. That's one conversation. Another conversation is, are these things that are triggering, are they patterns? Are they the similar things? Is it often something you can understand? Because in my situation, it was an amalgamation of all kinds of things, many different kinds of trauma that I hadn't resolved, and quite a lot of attachment wounding and narcissistic wounding, none of which meditation is designed to deal with. Or that's not entirely accurate. It's not optimal to use meditation to deal with those three. It certainly wasn't something that I was able to do. So in my situation, part of my process was to do the trauma therapy with a trauma therapist, to do the attachment wound repair with an attachment program, to get a feeling for what narcissistic wounding was and why it was, like, what's up with that? And how do you deal with that? So that it isn't all like in one basket, that one size fits all and one tool fits all. It's not. There's different modalities that are needed for these different things. And there needs to be some nuance and understanding and skill. In my situation, because it was complicated, there was many different kinds of all of these things that were operating. So in my situation, over many years, decades, I developed more nuance about what it was that I was dealing with, what the tools were that were helpful for the different kinds of things, and then started unpacking. And what I noticed was that when I actually did the work to shift the attachment patterning, that was a game changer. Because all of a sudden I had much more resilience, and the resilience made it possible to clear out trauma, and the resilience made it possible to deal with the narcissistic wounding and all the stuff that I was dealing with, like mop up, damage control, was then shifting into it's not arising any longer. It's radically different. So the answer to your question is not a simple answer. The answer to the question really is, where are you right now, and what are the tools and resources that you have? How aware are you about the different things that are arising and what is activating? And how clear are you about what you need to come back into your window of tolerance, to the managing of the zone? It's not simple. It's not as simple as go sit down and close your eyes and be with what's happening.
Thank you.
An article was just published on the Lion's Roar. Let me just pop it in the chat, because it also talks about, hang on a second, these three different things, and why the integrated meditation program, why attachment repair works and matters. So let me just pop it in here. This gives a little bit more context. Nancy.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here with everybody. Let me see how I can say this. So I'm recently retired, which is really nice. Really enjoying it. I worked for 43 years as a nurse practitioner, and many years with anyway, doing all of that stuff, and which I loved for the most part. Really grateful for the work. And now that life is slowing down, and I really am only responsible for myself, it's a really nice time to watch, and kind of being able to just look at things in a more relaxed way. And now with all the world of work stuff kind of gone away, certain things are becoming more clear. And that's And one of them is, which it's not something I'm clueless about, is, the people pleasing component of the personality. And, I'm 65 this year. And back in my early 30s, I had from 30 to 40, I had 10 years of a really excellent psychoanalysis trauma treatment in New York City. Really fortunate and thankful for that. But anyway, there's all of this other stuff that's still there. And I see it coming up, and, just trying to be really kind to myself. And I'm finding with compassion type of meditation that it's hugely, hugely helpful about, but even like with an old friend recently, like this kind of whatever practices I may be doing, wanting to get more quiet or whatever. There's a lot of, anyway, she's giving me a hard time. Let's put it that way. And I'm a little like afraid of her. And it's not like she's going to do anything to me or anything, but it's just curious for me. And I'm trying to, feel it in the body. And I mean, mostly the kind of mindful practices of the body and being with that are helpful, especially the compassion. The compassion stuff is like a game changer for me. It's really softening. And but I'm just curious, just some thoughts on that, or just kind of the people pleasing, which I have to do less of now. So just because I don't have to work. So like that is me, that's like a game changer. But even still with, people that I care about and other things and just, whatever, that's just a tendency in my life. And I do love to help and I love to give. It's a beautiful thing. It's an expression. It's like, I can't play the piano, but it's a creativity for me that I really have joy from and get good feeling for the most part. Not overdoing and overwhelmed and that kind of stuff. That's all like gone away, but I don't know, just.
So each of us is in a choice, in terms of like how we want to live our lives and what kind of level of engagement we want to deal with the patterns that we have. And it sounds like you've lived a very skillful life. You've done a lot of trauma work. You've had some good support and you're in a good space. And so, the fact that the patterns arise is common. For most people, the patterns continue to arise. And so then the choice is, or the question is, do you want to work with them in terms of responding to them as they arise? Or are you curious to get underneath them so that they no longer arise? And that's the question. And there isn't a right answer because everybody gets to choose how they want to do and what they want to do with this kind of stuff. But it's a choice. Right. And so if you want to just respond to the patterns as they're arising, then what you're describing are the tools and the skills that are really helpful for that. Compassion-based practices are really helpful for that. And learning how to not take yourself so seriously is really helpful for that.
And the not self.
Right.
I mean, anatta is like to not be, forever when people would say, don't take it personally. It's like, well, I'm always about, well, how do you do that? And, I mean, of course, I've learned other different things about it, but the not self, the de-identification is really powerful.
It is really powerful in terms of where it lands in your system, but it doesn't dismantle the pattern. And so the question is, what are you up for? And it's a fair question. There isn't a set answer for what you should be up for.
Right.
And so depending on what you're up for is depending on how I would respond to that question.
And that this is why I came for this, to be considering, because as much as I've had huge amount of like really good treatment and feeling, mostly really okay, I'm trying to think about exactly that question. And is there a particular, I'm sorry, I don't want to like take up, if I can ask a question can I ask one more question? If okay. Thank you. So with that kind of pattern, is there a particular just like approach that's recommended to look at that?
So I'm not a clinically trained person. I'm a meditation teacher with a intuition. So I have intuition. I don't have clinical training. And my intuition would be to start with the attachment repair and then to see what happens with that. And for a couple of reasons. One is that that's a gatekeeper for being able to do the other work if there is other work to do.
Mm.
And if there is other work to do, it will reveal itself.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking. And that's part of what you do in the course?
Yeah, so that's the 6-month course. The integrated meditation program is dedicated to attachment repair. That's its focus, and with good results.
Yes, I've read about it. So
Yeah.
curious. But this is hugely helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Comments, questions, thoughts? Yes, please, Frank.
Me and technology are not friends right off the bat. No, my question to you, Amma, much of how you just described your own experience in terms of how you addressed it, in terms of the different stages of help you had along the way, in terms of helping your journey of repair. And my question, as it relates to my practice and as it relates to meditation, is that I you know, we all have a set of circumstances that our lives that we are based in, that we do our meditation from, and we live in this box of that being something we believe to be true. And then once you've spent decades in that, and then find out that reality wasn't the one that was actually real, and your practice has been inside that box, so to speak, and you finally open that door, you have a very different relationship to your practice as you once did, because you feel, or I do, I shouldn't say we, I'm saying like we as the royal we. I find myself not knowing, I have counselors, I have things in my life that are assisting, but as it specifically relates to um, my practice, my meditation, is there anything that you might have any guidance on as it relates to trying to reorient ourselves once we've been in a situation for a very long period of time that wasn't actually the real one?
Well, it sounds like you're being very polite about something that was extremely difficult, and
I've been told that.
I can relate. I've been through things that have been extremely difficult, and it's phenomenally disorienting for a very, very, very long time. And in my situation, the politeness of the way that you're speaking hasn't given me much clue, but I'm reading between the lines and under the lines. And in my situation, again, it was totally disorienting for a very long time. There were a couple of things. One was that some things stayed, like the capacity for witness stayed, and the capacity for being able to track certain things stayed. So all of that stayed. But the connection to the group and some senses of self and the sense of belonging, a lot of that in my situation was pretty shattered. And it took me 15 years to wrap my mind around what actually happened and why it was so dysregulating.
Yeah.
And again, sorry to be a broken record, but it was the attachment repair that was the game changer, because until I did that, I couldn't see the harm in the system. I kept on going back to the pattern in myself.
Yeah.
And so until that shifted, I couldn't see what it was that I'd lived through. I couldn't see it. And then when I did the pattern shift in myself, then it was like, And then the F-bombs start flying.
Yeah. I'm in the gap between. And yes, the F-bombs do fly when I'm not in flight company.
And it's like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. And no,
Exactly.
no, 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 I wasn't kidding anybody, but that's what it took. And so it's been a long, long, slow process. And for me, again, the thing that was huge was shifting my attachment patterning. Because in my case, my patterning was that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. So I couldn't see the harm in the system because I kept on seeing what was wrong in me.
Yeah, I can identify with that too.
Mm-hmm. Let me just
Thank
check.
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I have done writing. So there's blog posts and stuff, and there's podcasts and stuff. And what I'm going to do in the next 6 weeks, 2 months or so is compile all these things because it's under a particular heading, and it's called spiritual abuse. And it is not easy, and it is extremely disorganizing, and it is extremely activating for any kind of attachment wounding or narcissistic wounding that we have.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to let you know you're not alone, and that there are resources and there are people who support each other coming out of this stuff.
Oh, and I'm very blessed to have some very close people.
Yeah.
And I'm using them to be the guideposts of what I was not able to see. And that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. What is attachment repair and how does it work? I will start, but I'm not going to be able to do it justice in 2 minutes. So attachment in a Buddhist language is the identification that we have to greed, hatred, and delusion. It's the thing that causes all the suffering. In Buddhist language, attachment is the thing that we want to eliminate or get rid of or reduce because it's the source of all suffering. In other language, psychological language, attachment means the bond that is formed between an infant and a caregiver. And it's not the cause of all suffering, it's the cause of what's necessary in order for life to flourish. It's the opposite. It's absolutely fundamental and critical that it's there in order for us to survive. So in the absence of 5 qualities, safety, attunement, comfort, delight, and encouragement, we developed strategies to cope, to survive, to keep us safe, to keep us sane, or somewhat sane. And those strategies are extremely resilient. Extremely resilient. And they have everything to do with how we feel about ourselves, about how we feel about others, about how much we can actually perceive accurately about what's going on in ourselves. And so when there wasn't enough safety, attunement, comfort, delight, and encouragement, we have patterns that form in the absence. And the way we repair it is by front loading, guess what? Safety, attunement, comfort, delight, and encouragement. And we do that structurally, we do that collaboratively, we do that imagining beings that are completely ideally supported to bringing, guess what? Safety, attunement, comfort, delight, and encouragement. So that when we have these in abundance, then the patterns start to shift based on the presence rather than the absence of them. And as it shifts, then we start noticing we feel different about ourselves. We feel different about the world. our capacity to track shifts, our anxiety level track shifts, our basic level of fear shifts. And I did it in 2 minutes. So enough for an evening. This is rich. And you guys, this is like way past my bedtime where you guys are. So nobody's in pajamas. And so it's amazing. So let me just come back to my notes for just a second. So I just want you just to pause. And just notice the impact of everything that we've talked about. And what does this leave you with? What is your internal sense right now? And this is the beginning. We have another class next Tuesday and then 4 hours on Saturday. And what I'd like to invite, if you would like, is either to chat in the chat a word or two, or raise your hand and we can hear you speak. But what are you leaving this evening with?
Warm appreciation.
Thank you, Tanya. Curiosity and hope. Thank you, Jacqueline. Curiosity. Lovely. Thank you, Nancy.
Support and safety.
Support and safety. Awesome. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, joy and hope. Helen and Hannah. Scaffolding. Thank you, Frank. Good. Well, I think we can call it quits for this evening. And so glad that you are able to make it. And we will put the recording up on YouTube and make it available. And to everyone who registered, please don't share the recording with others, because I'd like to keep this confidential. And stay tuned.
Thank you, Amma. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Amma.
Thank you, Amma.
Bye
Thank
for
you.
now.
Nice to
Yeah.
meet everybody.
night.
Take care.
Nice
Thank
to meet
you
you.
so much.
See you next week.
Next week.
Stay
Wow.
safe. Ciao.